The clatter of silverware against plates echoed in the cramped kitchen, every scrape punctuated by the hum of the overhead fluorescent light. I had just sliced the meatloaf and lifted a forkful toward my lips when Samantha's voice cut through the air like a razor. "You eat but don't help." She snapped her words, ricocheting off the linoleum floor. My fork hovered inches from my mouth, the meatloaf dangling precariously as though caught in a spotlight. Time stretched. The worn quilt draped over the back of the chair seemed to sag heavier. The clock's ticking sounded too loud, and the steam rising from my plate shimmered with tension. Jason's knife paused mid-chop, but his gaze stayed fixed on the table. My grandson's cheeks, puffed with peas, blinked confusion. In that instant, the kitchen walls shifted from sanctuary to cage. The simple act of eating became an accusation, and I realized their dinner table was where my world fractured. I lowered my fork slowly, each movement deliberate, as though retracing the steps that had brought me to this moment. The scent of overcooked peas and stale gravy hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Samantha's gaze was hard, her lips curled in disdain, as if the years of scrubbing floors and folding laundry had gone unnoticed. "You eat, but don't help," she repeated her words, crisp and unyielding. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from anger or shame, but from the sting of betrayal. My son Jason sat beside her shoulders, squared gaze glued to his plate. His silence roared louder than any defense he might have offered. I looked at him just for a moment, as if to find a flicker of compassion, but his eyes remained downcast. He didn't meet my gaze. He didn't challenge his wife. It was as though he had already abdicated his role as son, choosing instead to stand on the sidelines of our own family's unraveling. My grandson, little Alex, sat 2 seats away, his small belly bulging with peas. He glanced up, confusion clouding his wide eyes. Children absorb more than we give them credit for. His silence told me he understood enough to know the air had grown too cold for laughter. My chest tightened and I struggled for a steady breath. I wasn't going to crumble. Not here. Not now. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and recalled the morning light streaming through this very window when I first moved in to help out. This house had been home, the place where I'd held my husband's hand through his final days, where I had mended Jason's torn jeans, and where I had soothed Alex's first nightmare. It was the crucible of our family's life, and now it felt like a courtroom. I cleared my throat and opened my eyes. "Dinner's on the stove," I said quietly, though no one had asked me to cook. My voice was steady, almost detached. I set my fork down beside the plate, the knife clinking softly against its edge. I rose, moving around the table like a specter of dignity gathering dishes with the precision of someone determined not to break. Samantha's lips parted, perhaps to unleash another assault, but I didn't look back. My hands, gnarled by arthritis, fumbled with the edge of a coffee cup. I gripped its handle and felt the fine cracks beneath my fingers. My back ached from years of bending and lifting, but I straightened, centering myself. I carried each plate one by one into the sink, the water's warmth a stark contrast to the chill behind me. As I scrubbed the dishes, I could hear Samantha's low voice to Jason. Maybe she should take the hint. And there it was, the final blow. They wanted me to leave, to vanish like last week's laundry they'd never folded. My heart thudded in protest, but I stood firm, letting the dishes do the talking. Rinse, wash, rinse, wash. Each plate was a testament to the meals I had prepared without complaint, each mug a symbol of the coffee I'd brewed to keep their mornings going. I turned off the water and dried my hands on a towel I'd stitched myself. I caught my reflection in the window pane, a woman whose faith in her family had been unwavering, now tempered by the necessity of self-preservation. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just finished my task. When I emerged back into the dining area, the table was immaculate, save for the empty plates. Jason and Samantha were gone off to some couple's weekend, they'd said. Alex's toys rested on the carpet like silent witnesses to the spectacle they'd created. I gathered my purse and coat without fanfare, caring little for the indifference they'd shown. My hands moved with quiet resolve, each button fastened as though sealing my decision. I paused at the doorway, looking at the room bathed in the dying glow of the single overhead light. This space, once filled with family stories and laughter, had become an arena for cruelty. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the echo of their voices. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, but I welcomed the sound, a reminder that this house was no longer mine to inhabit by their terms. I placed the key on the small kitchen counter adjacent to the dish towel I'd laundered that morning. No note, no explanation. They had everything they needed to know. The key was theirs to retrieve if they dared. I turned and walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind me. The hush of the evening air enveloped me, and for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of relief. In my chest, a new resolve took root. I had fed them, clothed them, and held this family together for decades. Now it was time to feed my own soul and protect my dignity. My footsteps echoed down the sidewalk, leading me away from the familiar and toward a future I would define on my own terms. I turned back to the sink before a single word could pierce the hush that had fallen across the dining room. My image, reflected in the window pane, was both familiar and strange silver hairs caught in the glow of the overhead light, a crease at the corner of my eye that spoke of years spent smiling through hardship, and my hands, those faithful hands, trembling as they reached for a plate. I lifted it deliberately, its weight a reminder of every meal I'd ever prepared, every bowl of soup ladled with care when fever burned in my husband's chest, every sandwich wrapped to keep my son's lunch warm on a school day more important than any of us. As I stacked the plates beside the sink, 3 meatloaf dishes, 2 shallow bowls of peas, and a mug smeared with the last coffee. They never asked if I wanted. I felt the sting of arthritis in my knuckles, a dull ache that had never stopped me before. Tonight it threatened to slow me down, but I refused to let it define me. My hands had folded more loads of laundry than I could count, scrubbed more floors than some do in a lifetime, and yet here I was, accused of eating but not helping. So I helped quietly with the steady resolve of someone who knows their worth cannot be measured by a single insult. Water hissed as I turned on the tap, warmth rushing over my skin. I didn't hurriedly rinse the dishes as I might have years ago when there was a schedule to keep or visitors to impress. No, tonight I moved slowly, methodically. I let each plate soak for a moment, the detergent forming suds that clung like armor to the porcelain. The water ran clear, washing away the last traces of dinner and, metaphorically, the faint but painful residue of their cruelty. With each scrub of my sponge, I felt the grip of humiliation loosening, slipping down the drain alongside streaks of gravy and peas. Behind me, the table sat bare chairs, pushed in as though in polite order. I could almost hear the echoes of their footsteps walking away. Samantha clicking her heels on the hardwood floor. Jason's soft shuffle as he followed her to the front door, Alex's small sneaker tapping as he chased after them. Their departure left the room still, save for the soft clink of dishes and the low hum of the refrigerator. I closed my eyes against the perfume of soap and linoleum and listened to that silence. It was not empty, it was full of possibility. I recalled how a decade ago I had stood at this same sink while my husband faced his final weeks in the hospital. I'd washed his thin pajamas until they were thread-spooned applesauce into the gentle curve of his mouth when he could no longer chew solid food, and coaxed whispered prayers off his lips. Back then, this sink had been the great equalizer, a place where love found expression in the simplest acts. Now it was my refuge, the last bastion of control I held against their thoughtless words. The sponge slipped through my knuckles and fell into the basin. I flexed my fingers, feeling the familiar tremor that came with age and overuse. I let it linger, accepting it as part of the story etched into my veins. My mother used to say that strong hands are marked by the labors they endure, not by the smoothness they preserve. It was time to honor that lesson once more. I dried my hands on a flour sack towel, one I'd embroidered with a threadbare rose when I was learning to stitch, and folded it neatly. It joined the stack on the counter, its crisp folds a contrast to the chaos of emotion roiling beneath my calm exterior. I pressed the towel between my palms, grounding myself in the texture of fabric and thread. In that moment, I made a silent pact. I would not allow their neglect to erase the decades of care I had offered freely. Turning away from the sink, I surveyed the kitchen one last time. The yellowed refrigerator magnets, family photos, a child's crayon drawing of our house looked back at me, reminders of a life once shared. The linoleum floor with its cracked tile pattern bore the footprints of every child who had run through here. The old oak table wore scratches from rolling pins and coffee mugs left too long. Each mark was a testament to our story, and no one's insult could wipe that away. I reached for my coat, its fabric soft from years of wearing, and slipped it on as though preparing for another journey. In my pocket, I felt the smooth leather of my purse and the comforting weight of my rosary items I carried even when I forgot to pray. They were the anchors of my quiet strength, the symbols of a faith that had weathered storms far fiercer than marital strife. Before leaving, I penned a quick note on a sticky pad and placed it on the counter. The key is on the table. I will not return. No flourish, just the plain truth. They had asked me to leave. I was honoring their wish without fanfare. And in that act of departure, I reclaimed my narrative. I refused to crumble into dramatic pleas or tearful entreaties. My dignity was not a bargaining chip. As my foot pressed the front door's threshold, a final thought flickered through my mind. I had loved them fiercely, with every ounce of my being. I had built a life of service, of nurture, of day-after-day kindness. Their ungrateful words could not collapse the foundation of love and sacrifice upon which my identity rested. If they saw me as a burden, I would bear that label no longer. I would walk into the night free of their scorn, and toward a destiny I would define for myself. The door closed with a soft click, and I stepped onto the porch, the cool air greeting me like a friend. The small suitcase at my side held the few belongings I would carry forward. The tight knot in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a quiet resolve that glowed brighter than their dismissive laughter. I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom on the breeze. And as I locked the door behind me, I knew my story had only just begun. I lay on the narrow twin bed, if bed was the right word for this metal frame and thin mattress, pressed into the corner of the converted storage room. The ceiling fan above me flickered in uneven arcs, each gulp of air hot and sticky before sputtering back to life. Sweat beaded along my hairline, and I shifted beneath the scratchy blanket, trying to find a position that didn't send a jolt of pain through my aching hips. I counted the seconds between its whirs, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3. But the rhythm offered no comfort. It only underscored the hollow tick-tock of my unrest. Below in the living room, whose floorboards creaked with every footstep, I could hear their laughter. Samantha's high-pitched giggle chimed through the ceiling like shards of glass, and Jason's low chuckle rumbled beneath it. They sounded carefree and jovial, innocent of the storm they'd unleashed at the dinner table. My grandson, tucked away in his bedroom down the hall, must have been sound asleep by now, dreaming happy dreams that did not include the sting of his grandmother's pain. I stared at the ceiling until the fan blade's shadow sliced across the yellowed plaster and back again. Memories drifted through my mind and bidden my husband's gentle voice as he asked for a sip of water during his last chemotherapy session, the warm weight of his hand in mine as we watched the sunset from this very porch. I remembered how I had cleaned the floors and laundered his sheets when he still had strength to brag that I was too neat, how I had sewn the buttons back on Jason's school uniforms when he refused to tell me why his coat had ripped in recess. Now in this cramped room with only the echo of other people's joy to keep me company, I felt the slow erosion of 40 years of sacrifice. One by one, the bricks of my identity, the homemaker, the caregiver, the mother, crumbled under the weight of a single sentence. You eat, but don't help. Their words had been a call to arms, but I had chosen silence. Tonight, silence consolidated into resentment, and I felt it settle around my heart like a cold shroud. I rolled onto my side, pressing my face against the scratchy cotton pillow. The fabric smelled faintly of bleach and old dust, and it carried the unwanted intimacy of a room I would never have chosen. A single window high on the wall offered no view, just a pane that caught the faint amber glow of a street lamp outside. From it, the distant hum of cars on the quiet road intertwined with the murmur of voices. I tried to focus on the sound of traffic, imagining engines humming beneath the hood of my husband's old pickup engine cooling on the driveway after a run to the corner store. I breathed in that memory, but when I exhaled, the laughter returned, slicing through me once more. My back protested as I sat up. I ran my fingers along the scarred wall, tracing a path of chipped paint and spiderweb cracks. This room had once stored holiday decorations and out-of-season clothes. Now it held only the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the floorboards groan in recognition of my weight. My knees buckled slightly, a reminder that time and age waited for no one, not even the mother who had carried them on her hip. I moved to the small dresser in the corner, its drawers hanging slightly ajar as though pried open by some careless hand. I found my rosary beads in the top drawer, their smooth wooden knots familiar and comforting. I looped them around my fingers, whispering the first words of the Hail Mary under my breath. The beads slipped through my grasp, clicking softly against one another. Even prayer felt distant, like a language I once spoke fluently, but now struggled to recall. Restlessness drove me to the door of the room. I cracked it open and peered into the hallway. The inner walls were painted pale blue, the same shade I'd once chosen for the nursery when Jason was born. Now that color felt cold and sterile, like a hospital corridor. I slipped out and tiptoed down the hall, nearly colliding with a coat rack where my purse and jacket still waited from this morning's hurried departure. I grabbed them both and returned to the room, dropping them onto the bed with a soft thud. I sat on the edge of the mattress, pulling on my jacket's sleeves. In the pocket was the little notebook I always carried, the one my husband had given me on our silver anniversary. Inside it lay the tally of every clandestine expense, tuition, medical bills, grocery runs, Christmas gifts. All those ledger entries were silent witnesses to the kindness I had dispensed without fanfare. I traced the cover's embossed initials and felt a wave of sorrow for the woman I once was, so certain that love alone would be her legacy. A soft snore drifted down the hall, Alex at peace in his childhood room. The image twisted in my chest, a mother comforting her child through fear and nightmares, and now a grandmother who could offer only a shrug. I thought of the photograph on my dresser, Jason's high school graduation. My husband's proud smile catching the sunlight. I had sat in the back row to save money for him. Now that memory cut deeper than any insult, I sank back onto the bed. My knees throbbed in protest and the blanket scratched at my arms. I took my purse from the foot of the bed and removed the small leather-bound rosary case. I unzipped it and pulled out the envelope James had given me, my deed, my legal armor. I ran a fingertip along its crease, recalling James's calm voice as he explained that the house had been mine alone all these years. My husband's foresight had shielded me. Now I held that shield in my hands. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I brushed them away with the back of my hand. I had wept enough in empty hospital rooms and unlit corridors. Tonight I refused to be the spectacle of tears. Instead, I opened the envelope and slid out the crisp deed and will. Their presence was electric, infusing the room with possibility. I closed my eyes and let their promise wash over me. Protection, respect, autonomy. The fan above clattered in protest, then settled into a steady hum. I folded the documents and tucked them back into the envelope. The act felt ceremonious, like sealing a pact with myself. When I rose again, I felt steadier, as though the night's anguish had been tempered by resolve. The pain in my back still throbbed, but it no longer felt like a prison, more like a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of acting. I switched off the lamp and returned to the bed. The room was a shadowed sanctuary now. Sleep still seemed elusive, but I felt less afraid of its absence. Tomorrow I would face Jason and Samantha again. Tomorrow I would cook my own breakfast or decide not to. Tomorrow I would carry my purse and that envelope out of this house if they failed to show me the respect I had earned. For now, I closed my eyes and listened to the fan's steady pulse, a lullaby in a language I was relearning, the song of self-preservation, the melody of second chances. As the minutes drifted by, the edges of my mind softened. In the hush between flickers of the fan's blade, I heard the faintest echo of my own voice, unbroken by pain or sorrow. I refused to crumble. And in that whisper, I found the fragile promise of rest. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, each one a snapshot of the life I'd devoted to my family. I remembered the day my husband Mark was first diagnosed with cancer, how he sat at the kitchen table, face pale and drawn, and simply nodded when I reached for his hand. I'd been the one to call the doctor to research treatments late into the night with a single lamp etched in my husband's favorite bronze finish, casting its glow across stacks of medical journals. When the call came at dawn telling me his counts were too low for radiation, I held him as he wept my own tears, drying on the collar of his favorite flannel shirt. I remember the nights I stayed by his bedside in that hospital room, where the sheets smelled of antiseptic and the beeping machines marked time in ways my own heart couldn't measure. I'd washed his pajamas until the seams frayed, took the time to iron them, so he'd feel a shred of normalcy when he slipped into the crisp cotton against his skin. When chemo left him too weak to lift a spoon, I coaxed spoonfuls of chicken broth and mashed potatoes into his mouth, murmuring encouragement into the hollow of his ear. I watched the color return to his lips, only to fade again with the next cycle. Through it all, I never let my exhaustion show. I would leave the hospital at dawn, head straight to my night shift at the clinic, and greet my patients with a smile that sometimes felt more like a mask. At home, I sewed patch after patch onto Mark's quilted robe, the one he wore when the house got chilly in the mornings. The quilt had been my grandmother's, a family heirloom, stitched by loving hands, and I'd carefully reinforced every thread. Each stitch was a prayer for his recovery. The living room rang with the hum of my sewing machine, the rhythmic back and forth of the needle, a chant in support of his fight. Later, I would launder his laundry, fold each t-shirt and pair of socks with precision, as though folding his dignity back into shape. My son Jason was still in high school during those years. He saw me shuffle into the house after double shifts, shoulders stooped, hair frizzed from the hospital's dryness. He pretended not to notice the dark circles under my eyes, but I'd catch him staring when he thought I wasn't looking. His room was scattered with textbooks and dirty laundry, but I made sure his uniforms were spotless for school. Early one Saturday, I found him struggling with the zipper on his coat. I knelt beside him and zipped it up for him, without a word, tucking the collar just so. He met my gaze then for a bare second and shrugged like it was no big deal. But I knew that small act mattered. On weekends, I tipped into the kitchens of local restaurants, wiping counters, washing dishes. My arthritis flaring with each scrub, my back protesting each bend. By Sunday morning, I'd drag myself home, collapse into bed for a 2-hour nap, and then rise again to prepare lunch. It was during those languid afternoons that I would fold my arms around a fresh bowl of soup and remind myself why I did it for Mark, for Jason, for the fragile promise of family that pulls through our home like a heartbeat. I thought of the 4th of July picnic when Mark could still walk the short path from the house to the backyard grill. He insisted on flipping the burgers himself, even though his hands shook. I watched from the porch, arms crossed over my chest, as he spat out a grin when the lid of the grill slipped from my nervous hands. His laughter rang out clear and true, and for a moment the illness felt like an unwelcome guest at a celebration. Jason chased fireflies that night, his laughter echoing into a sky streaked with fireworks. I stood in the doorway, feeling the warmth of their joy in the chill of the summer air, knowing that moments like this were fleeting. When the day finally came, Mark's last day, I held his hand as the machines powered down. He looked at me with his cloudy blue eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I pressed a kiss to his forehead and told him I loved him. The world went silent in that moment, the room emptied of its beeps and rhythms, and the only sounds were his breath and mine. When he exhaled his final sigh, a feather white against the hospital's fluorescent glow drifted down from the ceiling tiles. I reached to catch it, but it slipped through my fingers, landing on the sterile floor. It felt like a sign, a reminder that life is fragile and love is what endures. After the funeral, I drifted through the empty halls of our home. His slippers still sat by the side of the bed. The toothbrushes side by side in the bathroom stood witness to a lifetime of shared routines. I ran my fingers over the carved wooden headboard he and I had chosen together, the pattern of leaves and vines tracing the years of our marriage. And then came Samantha's words at dinner, sharp as broken glass, cutting through the fabric of my grief and my devoted labor. In the dark of this small oppressive storage room, I clung to those memories as though they were lifelines. Each recollection reminded me of who I was before I became a burden in their eyes. I was the wife who held her husband's hand when he had no strength left. I was the mother who sewed his school uniforms out of love. I was the woman who worked nights so her family could breathe. None of those truths had vanished just because Samantha had chosen to ignore them. A tear slipped down my cheek, warm against my skin. I pressed my palm against my heart, feeling the gentle thump of love that had carried me through those days. I let the ache fill me completely until it softened, settling into a gentle sorrow rather than a burning rage. I realized that no single insult could erase decades of service and sacrifice. My story was etched into every spare hour I'd given, every hand-sewn button, every comforting meal, and every prayer whispered into the dark. I scooped up the rosary beads beside my bed and rolled them between my fingers. The worn wood was cool, a tangible connection to my faith and the strength it had lent me. I whispered a prayer, one I had prayed countless times, for patience, for healing, for the courage to carry on. In that steady rhythm, I found a spark of peace. Despite the chills of the night and the tremor in my knees, I rose from the bed. I walked to the window and gazed out into the hush of a world that had momentarily forgotten my value. The moonlight painted silver patterns on the ground, and I breathed in the night air, tasting freedom on the breeze. I knew what I had to do. I gathered the deed and the small stack of papers James had given me, the legal keys to the home I had built with blood, sweat, and tears. In my pocket, the envelope felt heavy with promise. As I returned to the bed, I paused again. For a brief moment, I conjured the image of those early mornings painting lines with my son of Mark humming softly in the kitchen as I seared his steak just the way he liked it, of Alex's freckles as he drifted off to sleep. Those memories belonged to me, etched in the deepest chambers of my heart. No dismissal at the dinner table could sever those bonds. I slipped under the scratchy blanket and placed the envelope on the nightstand. The envelope's weight carried the gravity of years of love that refused to be diminished by cruelty. I closed my eyes and let the fan's steady drone become a lullaby for my resolve. As exhaustion claimed me, I slept no longer sleepless with resignation, but cradled by the certainty that the next chapter would be written in my own hand with dignity and the memories of a lifetime of caregiving lighting the way forward. I woke before dawn the next morning, as I had every morning for the past 40 years, and padded quietly into the kitchen. The yellowed Formica counter still bore the faint imprint of last night's dinner plates, and I set about preparing coffee as I always did. Measuring the grounds with exacting care, filling the percolator halfway with water, and watching the amber liquid unfurl into steam. I could almost hear Mark's old gentle groan of appreciation when he took that first sip, the one that signaled he was ready to face the day. It hurt to brew it for ghosts and strangers, but habit carried me through. Once the percolator was singing, I moved to the laundry room. Jason's clothes still lay in neat piles. A pair of his khakis, the golf shirt Samantha insisted he wear on their weekend trips, even if he hated it. I popped a scoop of detergent into the machine, loaded the load, and pressed start. The motor hummed to life, and I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, listening to the familiar rhythm. When the cycle ended, I stripped the damp clothes onto the folding table, pressing each wrinkle smooth and stacking them as I had done when he was a boy, heading off to kindergarten. By mid-morning, while the sun climbed higher, I gathered the collection of plastic toys that cluttered the living room floor blocks, a battered toy truck, a stuffed bear missing an eye, and tucked each one onto a low shelf in the corner. The house smelled of laundry detergent and lingering coffee, a scent I once thought of as home. I paused in the hallway, glancing at the framed photograph of me and Mark on our first wedding anniversary. Him in a tuxedo, me in a simple white dress we bought on sale. That moment felt like a lifetime ago. I returned to the kitchen to warm a bowl of soup I'd made for lunch. It was chicken noodle Mark's favorite when he was sick. I ladled a portion into a chipped bowl and carried it to the dining table, sitting alone in Samantha's seat near the window. Outside the garden we had tended together bloomed riotously the roses I'd planted for our 20th anniversary, now overgrown but vibrant. I stirred the soup gently, tasting the salty broth and soft noodles, imagining Mark's admiring nod, just a small affirmation that he still mattered to me. No one asked if I wanted company. No one cared that I was eating alone. Later in the afternoon, I pulled a broom from the closet and swept the dusty corners of the living room. The spring cleaning list I'd started back in January lay forgotten in a drawer, but I resumed it with a quiet sense of purpose. I scrubbed scuff marks from the hardwood floor until my shoulders ached, then tipped up the sofa cushions and vacuumed the crumbs beneath. The house was spotless, gleaming with unacknowledged effort. While I worked, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from Jason's account, a cheerful selfie of him and Samantha lounging by a hotel pool, cocktails in hand, palm trees swaying overhead. The caption read, "Couples weekend in Cape May Nash relaxation mode." A second image showed Alex grinning beside them, little legs dangling in the shallow waiting area. They'd invited their friends, shared stories, laughed in the sun. And I, who had held that same last scoop of ice cream for him as he fanned the brain freeze away, was reduced to a passing afterthought. I felt the sharp sting of omission. 2 days had passed since Samantha's insult, 2 days in which I continued to cradle this household in my quietly laborious arms, and not once had they bothered to check if I was okay, to ask me to join them, or to send a note explaining why I no longer fit their version of family. Their weekend wasn't just a trip. It was a declaration of freedom from the very person who had kept their world on solid ground. In the early evening, I brewed a pot of tea, the herbal blend I favored when my arthritis flared, and carried it to the front porch. The humming hum of suburban calm had taken on a sharper edge. Neighbors strolled by with their dogs, oblivious to the drama inside my walls. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and let the cool breeze wash over me. It felt like a final courtesy, a moment of clarity, delivered by the wind. Either they would recognize me as part of this family, or I would have to recognize that I no longer belonged. I returned inside and cleared the table of the tea set. My fingers brushed the etched floral patterns on the china, and I thought of the first time I used that set early in my marriage when we hosted our Thanksgiving for 20 relatives. My heart ached with the memory of laughter and cranberry sauce-stained smiles. Now, in the echo of their absence, I felt the edges of my purpose fray. If this house could exist without me, if they could treat me as though I were invisible, then perhaps it was time I made myself truly go. I climbed the stairs to my former bedroom, now repurposed as a guest room since the children moved out. There on the dresser lay my rosary beads and a small stack of letters I'd penned for Mark during his last hospital stay. I retrieved a leather-bound notebook from the drawer, James's deed and will wrapped in its pages like a secret waiting to be spoken. The thought of leaving without any fanfare or farewell crystallized in my mind. I didn't need a grand exit. I needed a dignified one. Back downstairs, I placed the kettle on the stove and filled my little suitcase with clothes I'd set aside. I packed the essential records, my social security paperwork, a few family photographs, the rosary, and my rosary case. Each item carried the weight of memory and worth. I paused by the refrigerator and stuck a note to the door in Samantha's immaculate handwriting I've left. The key is on the kitchen counter. Please respect my privacy. No apology. No explanation. Just the plain truth. I slipped the note inside the refrigerator and closed the door. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of now-stale tea. My coffee maker, poised for dawn's ritual, stood like a testament to all the mornings I had prepared it, waiting for me to fill it one last time. With a steady breath, I picked up the suitcase and walked to the front door. I paused, hand on the knob, and spun to take in every last detail of the home I had given my life, to the floral curtains at the window, the chipped vase on the mantel, the careful stack of newspapers I'd saved for Mark to catch up on local news. I let it all sink in. Then I turned the knob, stepped outside, and closed the door softly behind me. The lock clicked into place without ceremony, sealing a chapter I would not revisit. The evening air felt cool and liberating on my face. I lifted my chin, ready to step into a future defined by my own terms, where my kindness would no longer be taken for granted, but honored in the silence I chose. As I walked to the bus stop, my suitcase wheels clicking over the sidewalk's cracks, I felt a serene determination settle in my bones. I was leaving behind the unpaid debts of their silence and claiming the dignity I had always earned. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the promise of tomorrow's dawn. The hallway light outside my room at Haven House blinked in quiet intervals, once, twice, and then the bulb flickered out, leaving me alone with the hush of the night. I lay on the thin mattress, the envelope from James resting on my chest, its weight both comforting and alive with promise. Sleep still eluded me, but this time it wasn't because of Samantha's mocking words or the slow ache of unacknowledged labor. Tonight my heart thudded with anticipation. I gently pried open the envelope and pulled out my phone. The deed and will lay folded within, but I hadn't dared look at them until I spoke with James. I swiped through my contacts and found him James Callahan. His name in bold letters against the black screen felt like a lifeline. I tapped it and the line buzzed as it rang. The tension in my chest eased slightly when I heard his familiar voice. "Ruth," he said, voice warm but hushed. "I was expecting your call." I cleared my throat. "James, I need to know." When Mark died, who held the title to the house, I was told it was family property, not mine alone. There was a pause, a soft shifting of papers on his end. "Ruth," he said, "your husband arranged everything several years before his passing. He had me add your name as sole owner, effective June 12, 1994. Your name alone appears on the deed and mortgage. You've been its legal owner for nearly 3 decades. My breath caught. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the tremor beneath my palm. He did that, knowing that someday. My voice cracked, the gravity of his foresight squeezing my throat, knowing I might need protection. James sighed softly. He was worried. He said you built that family with your hands and your heart. He didn't want you ever to be left homeless or at the mercy of ungrateful heirs. He asked me to hold on to the original deed and to file the change quietly. I did just that. I drew in a shaky breath. I never knew. I always assumed we shared it, that it belonged to all of us. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. I was too focused on caring, on making dinners, washing sheets, mending holes. I never looked for the proof. James's voice softened. You didn't need to. You lived it. But now it's time to use it. You asked me to send you the copy. Do you have it there? I sat up and pressed my palm to the nightstand. The envelope rattled beneath my fingers. I do. I closed my eyes. So legally, it's mine. Mine alone. Yes, he confirmed. You have the full right to decide its future. Sell it, rent it, live in it, or leave it to someone else. A surge of relief washed through me, warm as summer sun. I traced the envelope's edge, the paper slightly rough against my fingertips. All those mornings spent brewing coffee, those nights spent holding my husband's hand, those afternoon scuffles with the broom, each act had contributed unknowingly to the security of that title. I felt the truth settle like a mantle over my shoulders. Thank you, I said, voice steady. Thank you for keeping it safe. He paused. Ruth, I'm sorry you had to learn this the hard way, but I'm proud of you. You've earned this. I smiled at his words, the first genuine one in days. I won't waste it. We spoke a few more moments about next steps, about filing a notice of intention to sell, about ensuring the deed transfer would be handled discreetly. As I tucked the phone under my pillow, I felt a strange calm descend. The care home's quiet no longer felt like confinement, but like the cover of darkness before a new dawn. Morning came gradually, the light through the small window more hopeful than it had been. I rose and dressed slowly, the envelope now secure in the inner pocket of my cardigan. I made tea in the kitchenette and carried it back to my room, the steam rising in gentle spirals. I sat at the little desk by the window, the garden outside still drowsy with morning dew, and I opened the manila packet James had sent. The deed sheet proclaimed Ruth E. Johnson, sole owner, June 12, 1994. Below the notary's seal sat firm and unyielding. My name in crisp type glowed with a clarity I had never known. It felt like a revelation, a lifeline thrown across a chasm of unspoken gratitude. I folded the papers with care and placed them back in the envelope. Then, retrieving my leather-bound notebook, the one marked, "For the things we never want to forget," I scribbled a single line under today's date. I am the rightful owner. I'm seen. That act felt like exhalation, the release of breath I hadn't realized I'd held. I rose and made my way to the common room, carrying my tea. The residents were gathered around the small library table, reading, knitting, quietly chatting. Helen looked up from her yarn and waved me over. I sat beside her and handed her a cup. "Good morning," she said. "You look different today. Happier." I smiled at her perceptive warmth. "I feel different. I have news. I have something that will change everything." Her eyes glistened, ready to celebrate. "Tell me, dear." In a low voice, I shared the revelation Mark's plan, James's secret deed. The decades of silent ownership. She listened, nodding, her expression unfolding into pride, as though the victory belonged not just to me, but to every woman who had ever labored without credit. Afterwards, I wandered back to my room. I placed the envelope on the dresser and looked out at the garden. The roses stood tall and thorny, a testament to resilience. I ran a finger over the buds' soft petals through the glass, feeling the echo of my own strength. By midday, I had written a letter to Jason. No guilt, no accusations, only the facts he needed to hear. I folded it neatly, sealed it in an envelope, and dropped it in the center's mail slot. I did the same for Samantha, offering them the choice to respond, not with demands, but with recognition of what I had quietly carried for so long. That afternoon, I joined Helen and a few others in the courtyard for tea and conversation. Laughter spilled like sunlight across the brick walkways. I felt the heaviness of unspoken burdens lift from my shoulders. The deed was more than a piece of paper. It was the affirmation that my life's work, my years of daily kindness, had intrinsic value. I no longer had to prove anything to anyone. As the sun dipped low, I returned to my room and placed the deed envelope into my purse. I opened the window and let the cool breeze swirl inside. I watched as the evening shadows danced across the walls, free of the oppressive silence that had once haunted me. Tomorrow I would decide the fate of the house Mark and I had built together. But tonight, in this quiet apartment of new beginnings, I would simply breathe in the knowledge that I was not invisible, that my husband's love, like the ink on that deed, had bound me to a legacy of respect and autonomy. And for the first time in years, I felt the gentle thrill of possibility at my fingertips, ready to reclaim my story in full. The late afternoon sun slants through the slatted blinds of James's office dust motes, drifting in the beams like tiny phantoms. I step inside the familiar creak of the hardwood floor, greeting me like an old friend. Bookshelves line the walls, heavy volumes bound in cracked leather, their spines gilded with titles on contracts and trusts. The air smells of aged paper mothballs and the faint trace of my husband's old pipe tobacco. This place has always been a sanctuary of clarity, an oasis of order amid life's chaos, and today I need its steadiness more than ever. James sits behind his massive oak desk, his posture as upright as the day I first met him. He pours 2 cups of tea, the steam curling up like whispered advice. "Ruth," he says, setting 1 cup before me. "I'm glad you came." His eyes, lined with years of caring for others' affairs, flick to the envelope I've brought. I place it gently on the desk, an unspoken pact. He reaches into the drawer and produces a thick manila folder, edges softened by time. I feel my pulse quicken. The folder slides across the desk toward me, and I slide my hand over the top, feeling the slight indentations where my name has been pressed into official paper. I draw it closer, my heart pounding in quiet rhythm. I open it to reveal the notarized deed and the supplemental will. The deed is crisp and authoritative. Ruth E. Johnson, sole owner, 142 Maple Street, effective June 12, 1994. My eyes trace those words again, savoring their import. Underneath lies the supplemental will, its pages filled with legal precision. I turn to the critical section, Clause 17b. In the event that my son, Jason Johnson, shall verbally or physically abuse my wife, Ruth E. Johnson, or unlawfully attempt to evict her from the property located at 142 Maple Street, then any and all inheritance rights under this will granted to said son shall be immediately revoked. All estate assets, including the family home, shall transfer to Ruth E. Johnson as sole primary beneficiary. I lift my gaze to James. His face is compassionate but resolute. "He foresaw it," I whisper. My voice trembles with a mixture of betrayal and gratitude. "He knew I might need protection against those who would take advantage of me." James nods. He asked me to draft the clause in the months before his illness became critical. He wanted insurance, legal insurance, that you would never be left vulnerable. He folds his hands in front of him. "It's fully enforceable." I kept the original and filed a certified copy with the county clerk. Should the need arise, all we have to do is present this will and the corresponding evidence. I close the document and lean back, feeling the chair catch me firm and reliable. The deed and will sit in my lap like 2 shields. The room is so quiet, I can hear my own breathing steady and strong. I let out a slow breath that feels more like relief than anything I've known in weeks. James pours us each another cup of tea. "You're empowered," he says. "Now you know. You have the law on your side. If Jason and Samantha continue to dismiss you, you can invoke this clause immediately. It isn't a threat, it's a guarantee. Your home belongs to you." I cradle the warm cup between my hands, letting its heat seep into my bones. I never expected to need it, I admit. I thought loyalty and love would be enough. My voice catches. But I see now that sometimes you need more than good intentions. He listens without interrupting. Then he gives a small smile. "Intentions are powerful, but they're not enforceable in court. Legal rights are. You know what you have to do now, Ruth." He gestures lightly to the papers. "When you're ready, we can file a notice, prepare a transfer, or even sell the property, whatever you choose. The law is clear. I set the document aside and stare at the rows of books behind James' treatises on property law, estate planning, guardianship. I feel a surge of confidence. For so long, I'd been adrift, reacting to their slights, trying in vain to prove my worth. Tonight, I have a compass and a true north. This is no longer about punishment. It's about securing my future. I ask about the practical steps. James walks me through the process, notifying Jason's attorney, filing a petition with the probate court, submitting the clause. And any evidence of mistreatment, everything that Samantha's insult at dinner had crystallized into a legal breach. It's not complicated, he assures me. It's just necessary. We discuss timing. I don't want to rush this into a spectacle. I want their realization to come quietly, but irrevocably. He suggests sending certified letters, waiting the statutory response period, and then finalizing the transfer. All the while, I'm the homeowner, in the clear, no longer invisible or at their mercy. As the sky outside darkens, James leans back. I'll prepare the documents. You just let me know when you want to proceed. He folds the will and deed, sliding them back into their envelope with the care of a curator. The soft rustle of paper seems like a benediction. I rise, feeling the tension in my shoulders lift. I hand him the envelope. Thank you, James, for keeping this safe and for guiding me now. My voice is firm. He nods. It was his last act of love, and now it's ours to honor. He closes the drawer, locking away the original. The click is soft but resonant. I stand at the door for a moment, looking back at the desk where my future was secured with ink and seal. The world outside waits, full of decisions yet to make. But inside me, a new certainty glows. Stepping into the hallway, I feel the wood beneath my shoes, the faint scent of aged paper lingering in the air. I take a deep breath and let it out in a slow exhale. The legal empowerment James has given me is not just a shield, it's a declaration of self-worth. It says, you have value, you have rights, and you will be respected. As I close the door behind me, I walk down the hall with a steadiness I haven't known since that dinner table humiliation. The path forward may be fraught, but I carry with me the confidence of the law and the love of a husband who saw my worth even when others did not. Tonight I leave the dusty office, clutching a future I choose on my own terms. I laid the single house key on the spot I'd chosen for it, centered on the kitchen table, nestled beside the folded dish towel I'd washed that morning. It gleamed under the harsh overhead light, an unspoken testament to years of meals prepared and floors swept. I paused, hand resting on the smooth metal, feeling the weight of every silent sacrifice it represented. Without ceremony or fanfare, I stepped back. No note adorned the fridge, no rambling letter full of explanations, just that key waiting for them to realize what their words had cost. I moved through the rooms that had hosted birthdays and bedtime stories, funeral gatherings and holiday feasts, touching the doorframe as though to absorb a final glimpse of the life I'd built. The living room looked smaller now, its walls echoing the absence of appreciation. I ran my finger along the edge of the coffee table Mark and I had refinished together, its varnish worn by decades of family hands. My heart tightened, but I did not falter. With my suitcase slung over one shoulder and the folder containing the deed and will pressed under the other arm, I stepped out the front door. The air felt brisk, carrying the promise of rain. I closed the door gently, then clicked the deadbolt once, twice for good measure. The lock's soft metallic click was final, like the last page of a chapter turning itself. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the block. My suitcase wheels whispered over cracked pavement. Neighbors emerged from their homes. Some waved in polite surprise. Others offered sympathetic nods. I returned their gestures with a steady smile. I carried within me a different kind of burden now. Not the weight of their unspoken judgment, but the quiet uplift of knowing I held the key to my own future. The bus arrived with a tired hiss of brakes. I climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. The driver nodded in greeting as I showed my pass. As the cityscape slid by, mailboxes, a florist shop window, a playground gate, my thoughts looped back to the note I hadn't left. They said you eat, but don't help. Now they would eat those words. But the journey ahead wasn't about revenge, it was about renewal. I held my breath for a moment when the bus turned onto the main thoroughfare, the familiar streets yielding to older neighborhoods. The houses grew smaller, the yards overgrown, the sidewalks dotted with fallen leaves. I looked down at the folder in my lap, the deed stamped with my name alone, the Wills Clause 17B, waiting in reserve. The law was on my side, but tonight my heart demanded a different kind of shelter. When the bus reached the care home, I stepped off with my suitcase and my purse. The building rose before me, a squat brick structure with windows like watchful eyes. Its sign read, Haven House lettering faded but dignified. I hesitated at the entrance, feeling the same pulse of doubt I had felt the night I first knit my courage into my announcement. Then I squared my shoulders and rang the bell. The woman at the front desk studied me behind her small framed glasses. Name, she asked, pen poised over a clipboard. Ruth Johnson, I said, voice steady. I have a reservation. She didn't ask why I was leaving my home or what had driven me here. She simply handed me a form and a pen. Fill this out, please, she said. Room 12. Second floor. Elevator to your right. I settled onto the vinyl chair and completed the paperwork, date of birth, emergency contact medications. The pen scratched across the paper, each signature, a declaration of my ownership of this decision. When I was finished, I returned the form, and she handed me an old-fashioned brass key on a large ring. Room 12, she said. Welcome to Haven House. My heart fluttered as I turned and followed the corridor. The walls were painted a soft, welcoming green, and the carpet muted my footsteps. The sign for room 12 was a simple metal plaque, and when I slipped the key into the lock, it turned with a reassuring click. Inside the room was modest, a twin bed with white sheets, a small dresser, a window looking out onto a courtyard dotted with potted geraniums. A single armchair sat under a soft lamp. I set down my suitcase and folder, letting the quiet envelop me. The nurse who showed me in offered a gentle smile. If you need anything, just let me know. Dinner is at 6. We'll make sure to set a seat for you. Thank you, I said, voice catching with gratitude. No pity, no unnecessary fuss. Just kindness extended without question. Left alone, I sat on the bed and unpacked a few changes of clothes, my rosary beads, the leather-bound notebook where I'd begun tallying decades of my own generosity. I placed each item carefully in the dresser drawers, creating order in this new temporary sanctuary. Later, I ventured out into the common room. A group of residents sat in mismatched chairs around a coffee table cluttered with magazines. Some watched a rerun of an old sitcom, its laugh track a jarring counterpoint to the soft hum of the overhead lights. Others dozed or worked on crossword puzzles. I stood by the doorway, uncertain, until a woman with silver hair and a sturdy walker beckoned me over. Coffee, she asked kindly, holding out a mug. The steam rose in comforting swirls. I accepted it, grateful for the gesture. I introduced myself, and she said, I'm Eileen. I moved in last winter. Sometimes I forget breakfast, and they send me here for a pick-me-up. Her eyes crinkled as she smiled. I told her my name. We exchanged polite small talk about the weather, the recent fall festival in town, the softness of the slippers they provided. No one asked me about my past, and that was a mercy. That night after dinner, a simple casserole, and back in my room, I sat by the window and stared at the courtyard below. Lanterns glowed as other residents puffed on cigarettes or strolled the paths. The murmur of hushed conversations and distant laughter drifted up. It was a different kind of music from the one I'd known upstairs. Here there was no cruelty, only the gentle rustle of people coexisting. I lay down and reached for my notebook. In the margin beside today's date, I wrote, "Silent exit complete." Among the forgotten I am found. I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of ease in my chest. The ache of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. In the hush of this care home among strangers, whose only crime was age, a quiet voice whispered, "What if they're wrong about you?" And in that whisper, I found my answer. I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am home. Late one afternoon, I sat at the small desk in my room at Haven House, the filtered sunlight slanting across the leather-bound notebook that lay open before me. Its pages were yellowed at the edges, the leather cover creased from decades of use. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters on the front R.E.J. and took a slow, steadying breath. This book had begun its life as a simple household journal, grocery lists, reminders of doctor's appointments, birthday gift ideas. But over the years, it had quietly transformed into something far more profound, a ledger of love and sacrifice. I turned to a fresh page and lifted the ink-stained pen from my purse. The first entry I wrote was dated March 12, 1994. Tuition assistance for Jason's first year of college, $2,300. I remembered how he sat at that kitchen table, eyes shining with excitement and fear, needing to know that I had his back. I had emptied my small savings to cover that first semester, stitching together extra shifts at the clinic and finding babysitting gigs on the weekends. At the time, I never thought to mention it. Helping my child felt like the most natural thing in the world. I paused, finger tracing that date, then wrote June 5, 1996. Paid auto repair on Mark's old truck so he could drive to chemo treatment, $750. The memory was as sharp as if it had happened this morning. Him standing in the driveway wearing a hospital gown beneath his winter coat, shivering despite the heater blasting. I handed over the money, convinced that a working vehicle would make his burdens lighter. He'd smiled wanly and said, "Thanks, Ruth. You're my rock." I shrugged it off, but inside I was both proud and achingly sad. Line after line, I recorded expenses September 18, 1999. Covered a month's rent when Jason was between jobs, $1,200 April 2, 2002. Emergency ER. Copay for Mark after infection, $300. July 14th, 2005, plum tree for family garden after the old one died, $60. I paused on each entry to recall the circumstances, the late-night phone calls, the unexpected medical bills, the decisions made on the fly to protect those I loved. My spine ached from the remembered stress of juggling finances. My eyes teared up at the memory of Mark's whispered gratitude and Jason's relieved grin. By the time I reached 2010, the entries had grown more frequent and larger. November 3, 2010. Down payment on IVF treatments for Samantha and Jason, $7,000, March 22, 2013. New water heater after sudden breakdown, $950. May 15, 2015. Assisted with Samantha's dental surgery, uncovered by insurance, $100. I let the pen hover before jotting down the final line, December 12, 2020, pandemic groceries for the family for 5 months, for $500. My hand trembled slightly as I set the pen down. I closed the notebook and flipped back to tally each figure. $200, $750 plus $1, $200, $300, $60, $7,000, $950, $200, $500. The total kept climbing as I added each sum. When I reached the bottom of the last page, the final figure glared at me, $120, $710. I exhaled the sound of release echoing in the still room. $120,000. Not pocket change by any standard. But more than the numbers, it represented nights spent on hold with insurance companies, roads driven at dawn to save on daycare for clients, heartbreak folded into each receipt. I lifted the notebook to my chest, feeling the weight of love and sacrifice pressing into me. I felt both sorrow at the lack of recognition and a quiet pride in my own unwavering dedication. I rose, notebook in hand, and headed down the hall to James's office. The wooden nameplate on his door caught the light as I knocked softly. He ushered me in and motioned to the chair across from his desk. I sat and opened the notebook to the middle where I had written "Lifetime of Love, Ledger of Labor" in loopy cursive. "James," I said, voice steady, though my heart fluttered. "I've done something." I tallied every expense I ever covered for them, all the times I smoothed their path. It came to more than $120,000. I handed the open book across the desk. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the entries. He looked up at me, a question in his warm gaze. "You did this for what purpose?" I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Not for revenge," I said carefully. "I don't want to shame them. I want my labor to be honored. I need proof of what a lifetime of kindness really costs." I closed the book so he could see the neat, handwritten total on the cover page. "I'm going to give you a copy. I want it included in my living will. Call it a testament of maternal labor. Someday someone might ask why I won't stay silent, and I want them to have the numbers." James nodded thoughtfully, pressing his fingertips together. "This is powerful. Documenting your generosity like this, making it plain for anyone to see, ensures your work isn't erased by a thoughtless word." He tapped the ledger gently. "I'll make certified copies for your file. This can accompany the deed and will so no one can ignore your contribution." I thanked him, relief threading through me. He rose and fetched a small stack of crisp paper. The photocopier whirred softly as he duplicated each ledger entry, pasting them onto official letterhead. I watched him work, feeling the ledger's transformation into a living document, a record that would stand in court or at a family meeting if needed. When he finished, he handed me a clean stack of copies bound at the top. I slid them into a manila envelope, sealing it with a flick of my wrist. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't about numbers. It was about bearing witness to a lifetime of love. It was about telling the world and reminding myself that my generosity was not invisible, that it could no longer be dismissed as expected or entitlements. Walking back to my room, I felt a quiet resolve settle around me like a second skin. The pages of that notebook, once hidden in a drawer, were now a monument to my life's work. I placed the envelope beside the deed and will on my nightstand. Tomorrow I would decide whether to sell the house, rent it, or convert it into something new for those who, like me, need a sanctuary. But tonight, I simply acknowledged my truth. As I lay back in bed, I thought of the women before me in Haven House, the ones who washed a child's hair when they shouldn't have to, the ones who cooked countless meals for husbands and sons, who later brushed them aside. They were not burdens. They were wells of strength. And now I had proof that their labor, too, deserved to be honored. In the hush of the care home night, I closed my eyes and allowed that truth to cradle me. I was not merely someone who ate. I was someone who built, who nurtured, and whose kindness had a price worth remembering. And with that knowledge, I slept at last, secure in the power of my own story. The day the escrow finally cleared, I stood on the sidewalk in front of the 4-unit building I had just purchased, its brick facade, weathered windows, a mix of cracked panes, and fist-sized holes patched with plywood. The realtor clutched my hand, offering congratulations, but my eyes traced the faded sign above the door where peeling letters once spelled out Maple Terrace. I covered the sign with my hand and imagined the new name I planned to paint in its place, Haven House. I had arrived here with only the sale proceeds from my old home, the leather folder ledger of my lifetime's giving, and a resolve burning brighter than any fear. The building needed work, a sagging porch, a leaking roof doors that stuck on their frames, and outdated wiring that would make any fire marshal shudder. But I saw potential beneath the peeling paint, a sturdy foundation on which I could build not just apartments, but a community of refuge for elders like me who deserved more than pity or neglect. I leaned into the realtor's parting handshake. "Thank you. I said, voice steady. She smiled politely and moved on to her next client. I watched her go, then turned the key my lawyer had provided. The lock clicked open with a satisfying clunk, and I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun that dripped through the dirt-spotted windows. The air smelled of mice and mildew, a bitter reminder of the years of vacancy. But as I set down my suitcase and folder, I breathed in deeply and tasted hope. I set my ledger atop the front desk area, once a lobby, now just an empty nook, and let my fingers brush the countertop. This would be my command center, the heart of Haven House. My first act was to call Tommy a local handyman whose mother had once lived in a care home. When I told him my vision, a nonprofit for elders where no one had to prove their worth, he arrived that afternoon with his toolbox slung over his shoulder and a grin that looked as weathered as these walls. "You sure you want to tackle this?" he asked, surveying the sagging steps. I nodded, and he shrugged, rolling up his sleeves. "Then let's get started." Over the next weeks, Tommy and I worked side by side. We replaced the porch boards with fresh cedar planks, the scent of wood shavings filling the air. He rewired the old light fixtures, installing warm bulbs that made the lobby glow at dusk. I spent mornings painting the walls in soft sage and ivory colors chosen for their calm, nurturing vibe. The spring breeze drifted through open windows, carrying the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. Each spike of rehab felt like a promise this place would be different. I furnished the apartments with a patchwork of donated furniture, overstuffed armchairs rescued from a church sale tables built by local carpenters who offered their services at cost, and mattresses so plush they cradled sore bones like a cloud. I installed a small kitchenette in each unit, a single sink, a mini fridge, and a hot plate, so residents could prepare simple meals without relying on staff. Most important, I refused to hang any "no loitering" or "quiet hours" signs. Here they could move at their own pace day or night without fearing a reprimand. I chartered the final permit with tears in my eyes. When the inspector gave me the green light, I walked through the hallways as though I were christening a new ship. I pictured the first residents who would arrive, their suitcases in hand, their skepticism mingling with relief. I imagined their smiles when they saw the potted herbs we had planted in old bathtubs, rosemary, mint, oregano herbs to season meals and lift spirits. I saw gardens blooming in front of every window and benches under pergolas that I'd constructed from reclaimed lumber. Recruitment flyers went up in community centers, libraries, and clinics. Haven House, a home for elders with dignity, no proof required. I waited by the phone, heart hammering, until the first call came. A woman named Helen, 90 years old, and as sharp as the needles she insisted on knitting with, asked if she could see the place before deciding. "I've lived with other folks," she said. "They wanted me to prove my worth. I'm just tired of that." I promised her a tour the next morning. When she arrived, I met her at the front door and led her down the hall. Her walker clicked against the floorboards, and she paused to admire the handrails I had installed at hip height. "You thought of everything," she said, eyes bright. We climbed the narrow staircase, and I opened the first door. The apartment was warm, not just in temperature, but in tone. Sunlight pooled on the hardwood floor, and a potted fern breathed life into the corner. Helen's gaze lingered on the kitchenette. "I could make myself tea here," she whispered. "I like that." She moved in that afternoon carrying a small bag of clothes and a treasured teacup. That evening, I joined her in the common room, a cozy space with mismatched sofas and a record player in the corner. I poured us each a cup of chamomile tea, and Helen nodded approvingly. "To us," she said. "To having a home that doesn't feel like a hotel." Her words wrapped around me like a quilt. By month's end, 3 more residents had arrived. Miss Beatrice, a retired school teacher who still corrected our grammar. Marion, a former florist who now tended the herb tubs like a sacred duty. And Roland, the first man to move in, whose laughter echoed through the hallways as he told corny jokes. Each one brought a story, a fragment of life that found its way into the community tapestry we were weaving. We held our first welcome circle in the courtyard, a ring of chairs under the pergola draped with climbing jasmine. I passed around a steaming kettle of tea and encouraged everyone to share a bit about themselves. Helen recited a poem she wrote on a napkin. Miss Beatrice read a recipe she taught her students for apple crumble. Marion offered sprigs of basil to pass around. Roland cracked a joke about the time he tried to grow orchids and ended up with a handful of leaves that refused to bloom. We laughed, not out of novelty, but from genuine connection. That night, I walked through the building, pausing outside each apartment door to listen. I heard the soft murmur of a sermon playing on the radio, a soft chuckle over a phone call, the scratch of knitting needles at work. Silence here was not the absence of life, but the presence of peace. As I reached the lobby, I glanced at the faded sign and gently peeled off the last of the old letters. I painted Haven House in crisp white above the door, 2 words that carried the promise I had forged from pain, a refuge where worth was never questioned, where kindness was currency, and where everyone belonged without caveat. I stepped back and let the fresh paint catch the porch light. In that glow, I felt a surge of fulfillment that no amount of entitlement from my past had ever provided. This was my legacy, not a house of resentment, but a home of renaissance. Tomorrow I would officiate our first communal dinner in the courtyard with homemade stew and fresh bread. We would toast to new beginnings and forgotten chapters reclaimed. And as the sun sank behind the trees, we would share a silence that spoke louder than any accusation. Here we are wanted. Here we are home. I step into the courtyard just as the late morning sun is beginning to warm the flagstones, carrying a tray piled with steaming teacups, a fresh pot of chamomile, and a plate of sugar cookies. Helen and Roland are already there, seated in mismatched wicker chairs under the wisteria-draped pergola. Beatrice and Marion linger by the little herb garden, tucking mint and oregano sprigs into small vases on the low table. The air is sweet with jasmine and promise. Tea's on the porch, I call, and the group's chatter rises like music. Roland waves his teacup in greeting, its handle chipped, but his smile whole. Helen folds her walker beside her chair and leans forward, eyes bright. Just in time, she says, "I was about to storm Miss B for hogging all the cookies again." I laugh as I set the tray down, the cups wobbling slightly on their saucers. Each clink of porcelain is an invitation to pause, to savor this moment of collective softness. I pour the tea, feeling the warmth seep through the spout and into each cup. "Here you go," I say, handing a mug to Roland, his fingers shaking slightly as he cradles it. "And you, Miss Helen, your favorite." She inhales the steam like a ritual. "It smells like Sunday mornings at home," she murmurs, taking a careful sip. I watch her shoulders relax as the warmth spreads. Roland rests his mug on his lap and guffaws. Sunday mornings indeed. Sweet tea and biscuits, don't let Marion tell you otherwise. Marion emerges from the garden dirt, flecked on her floral apron, and a sprig of basil tucked behind her ear. She holds out a small bowl of sautéed green beans, the result of her evening cooking class. "Taste these," she urges. "Fresh garlic, a touch of bacon fat, just like my mother taught me." Beatrice hobbles over a silver cane, tapping the stones, her teacher's discipline intact, even in approach. "Green beans," she declares, inspecting the dish. "Steam is the only way, anything else is sacrilege." Roland waves a jovial hand. Sacrilege or salvation, Marion's beans bear history in each bite. He passes the bowl. Helen takes a piece and chews reflectively. "I like the garlic," she says, "but bacon fat. Now that's decadent." The group burst into a playful debate, voices rising and falling, friendly barbs flying like petals in the breeze. I lean against the pergola post, listening. Each laugh, each teasing correction threads us closer together. Here no one wonders if they've earned their place at the table. They simply belong. For months, I've watched these interactions bloom. Helen's poetry readings at midnight, Roland's impromptu guitar sessions. Beatrice's grammar lessons delivered with a wink, Marian's flower arranging workshops in the lobby. Their talents, once overlooked, now shine as the very lifeblood of our community. After the green bean debate winds down, I clear the plates and pass around dessert sugar cookies shaped like flowers. Roland takes two, one for himself and one for someone who hasn't yet found their smile today. I catch his eye and he nods. Lady on the swing could use some sweetness. He points to the courtyard bench where a quiet gentleman named Harold sits alone reading a letter by lamplight hours ago. I gather the cookies and carry them over. Tea and cookies, I announce softly. Harold looks up startled, as though he's been woken from a dream. I hand him the plate. Marian made these. She swears they're better than her grandmother's. He smiles, the edges of his mouth crinkling. I'll be the judge of that, he says. I leave him to the company and return to the pergola where the conversation has turned to summer fairs and the best route to the produce stand down the street. In that moment, I feel a swell of purpose. Haven House isn't just a building of 4 units, it's a living organism, fueled by kindness and mutual respect. Each resident, discarded by circumstance or family, now finds a place to contribute. A book club I host on Thursdays, where we dissect mysteries like old friends trading secrets. A weekly knitting circle that produces blankets for the homeless shelter. Impromptu dance parties in the lobby to tunes from our youth. Here, every skill is valued, every story heard. Later, as afternoon drifts into evening, I lead a walk through the small garden out front. The potted herbs have flourished under Marian's care, their leaves quivering in the breeze. I bend to sniff a sprig of thyme and feel a hand slip into mine. It's Beatrice, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Thank you, she whispers, voice thick. You gave me a reason to plant again. I smile, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. You gave them a reason to taste the world again. By sunset, the courtyard is bathed in golden light. We gather for a final cup of tea before heading inside. Roland strums a few chords on his guitar. His song is soft nostalgic, a melody half forgotten, half remembered. Voices join in tentative at first, then stronger, a chorus of reclaimed joy that rises above the hum of the world beyond our walls. Watching them, I feel the sharp edges of my own past soften. The ledger of sacrifices I once tallied now rests in a drawer, its weight lifted by the truth that my love has multiplied here among these cherished souls. I realize hasn't been about repayment, but restoration, restoring dignity to those who thought they'd been erased. As the last light fades, I close my eyes and listen. The fading strum of guitar, the gentle clink of teacups, the murmur of shared stories. This is the music of belonging. And in this harmony, I find my own note clear and sustained, resonating with the knowledge that sometimes home is not where you live, but where you are seen, respected, and loved. In the hush that follows, I remember Samantha's harsh allegation. You eat, but don't help. And I smile, knowing that here at Haven House, eating, sharing, loving each act of kindness is the very help that builds community and cures loneliness. And I, who once was called a burden, have become the heart of a place where every elder is treasured, not tested, and where the simple act of belonging is the greatest gift we can give one another. The knock on my door came softly tentative, as though they weren't certain they deserved an answer. I set down the chipped teacup I'd been cradling its warmth, still lingering in my palms, and called out, "It's open." The door swung inward, and there they stood, Jason, his face drawn and pale, Samantha's eyes red-rimmed and glossy. They looked like visitors come bearing grief, not the couple who'd once dismissed me as a burden. Jason swallowed before he spoke. "Mom, Ruth, please, I know you did what you thought was best, but can we talk? Can we make this right?" His voice cracked on the last word, the strain of months of silence and unspoken hurts boiling into desperation. I gestured to a pair of patchwork chairs by the window. "Have a seat." They took the invitation as though in a hospital waiting room before a final prognosis. I stood by the small side table, teacup in hand, and watched them fumble through apologies and half-formed regrets. Samantha's voice was tremulous. "I'm sorry," she began, "for what I said at dinner. I never should have spoken that way. And for not inviting you, we were selfish." Jason nodded vigorously, glancing at Samantha before turning his gaze back to me. "I should have defended you. I should have said something. I'm sorry too." Their pleas hung in the air like a heavy fog. I inhaled, steadying myself. This was the moment I had envisioned and dreaded, when they would come knocking, wanting to undo the justice I'd claimed. Yet I had already moved beyond anger. My empowerment had been legal, yes, but it had also been deeply personal, a reclamation of self I would not reverse. Sitting down slowly, I uncrossed my legs and set the teacup on the table. Its saucer caught the afternoon light, casting a slender glow. "Jason, Samantha." I said, my voice gentle, but unwavering. "I appreciate your apologies. But this isn't about whether you're sorry. It's about recognizing who I am and what I've done." Samantha's brow furrowed. "What you've done? We never doubted your love." Her words were quick, defensive. I leaned forward. "Love is not measured by words alone, but by actions sustained over a lifetime. You ate every meal I cooked. You wore the clothes I mended. You lived in the house I fought to keep for all of you. Yet you dismissed my worth with a single sentence." I paused, letting the weight of that truth settle between us. Jason shifted uncomfortably. I know it was wrong." His eyes dropped to his hands, knuckles white. I nodded. Yes, it was wrong. And because it was wrong, I had to protect myself. I had to reclaim the dignity I'd lost. I reached into my purse and withdrew the sealed envelope, the copy of the deed and the ledger of my lifetime contributions. I held it out to Jason. "These are your deeds," I said. "Not to Haven House, but to your own future. They're empty now, just paper, like the promises you failed to keep. I'm giving them back to you." His gaze flickered up. "You sold the house." The words were more a statement than a question. "Yes," I replied. "I sold the house that belonged to me." Proceeds built Haven House a refuge for people who deserve respect, not tests of worth. I created a home where no resident has to prove their usefulness. I placed the envelope in his trembling hands. "These documents are yours to fill, not to earn mercy, but to guide your own path." Samantha rose impulsively and reached out. I stepped back, not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone protecting her boundaries. "No," I said softly, "not now. You have time to reflect." She sank back into her chair, tears brimming. "Mom, I don't know how to fix this." Her voice was small. I set my teacup aside and crossed to stand over them. "You don't fix this by erasing what happened. You fix it by growing into the people you want to be. Respect isn't owed. It's earned through consistent compassion and understanding." I placed a hand over my heart. "I will not forget what you said at that table. But I'm not here to hold a grudge. I am here to protect my peace." Jason swallowed. "Is there anything we can do? Anything at all?" I looked out the window for a moment, watching the spring breeze stir the branches of the maple tree. "You can choose differently," I said. "You can show kindness, not because you need forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do. That choice is yours alone." They sat in silence, absorbing my words. I felt no triumph, only a serene clarity. The years of unacknowledged sacrifice, the tears unshed, the evenings spent tallying my generosity, all had brought me to this crossroads. And now I stood in the sunlight of my newfound autonomy. I gathered my purse and the small purse of the deed. I'm going upstairs, I said, voice steady. I'll be making tea in the common room if you need me. I paused, softening. Know this. I'm not leaving to punish you. I'm living my truth. If you want to be part of my story still, you'll find the door open, but you'll need to walk through it with respect. With that, I turned and walked back down the hall, my steps echoing on the hardwood. I felt my teacup's warmth return as a quiet smile. In the common room, the record player awaited, and the smell of jasmine drifted in through the open window. I poured fresh tea into a clean cup and carried it to my favorite chair by the bookshelf. I settled in, closing my eyes as the notes of an old hymn drifted from the stereo. Outside, faint footsteps passed by the corridor, perhaps Jason and Samantha on their own journey of reckoning. Inside my teacup warmed my hands, the steam rising like a benediction. I allowed a single breath to fill me, feeling the peace I'd fought so hard to claim. For the first time in years, I felt belonging, not because someone welcomed me, but because I welcomed myself. And in that welcome, I found the home I had sought all along, a story authored on my own terms, a life unbound by anyone's judgment but my own.